See.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the April meeting of the Montgomery County Civic Federation. Glad to see all of you here. It'll be a lively, robust, and educational conversation. We have a couple of administrative things that we do before we start our program. The first thing to do is, why don't we take, there's a few people on the call. Why don't we just introduce ourselves and say what neighborhoods we live in so we get a sense of what we're talking about. Jerry Garson. Jerry Garson, if he was unmuted, would say that he lives in Regency Estates.
Okay, I'm now unmuted. I live in Regency Estates Citizens Association in Potomac, Maryland, and I'm the treasurer of the Civic Federation. If anyone would like to send dues, please send dues to us.
Karen Cordry.
I'm president of Kensington Heights Civic Association, which surrounds the Wheaton Mall, and I'm the recording secretary.
Anita.
Anita Neal Powell, the president of the Lincoln Park Historical Foundation, and I live in Rockville, District 3.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Who's in Joyce's window?
Lloyd Gersey. I live in Chevy Chase West. I'm vice chair of the Citizens Coordinating Committee on Friendship Heights.
Thank you. Pat Tyson.
I am Pat Tyson, sitting in for Charlotte Caulfield, who's the president of the Legislative Civic Association. I'm the secretary and happy to be here for her.
Nice to see you. Everybody, if you're not talking, mute your mics. Jackie?
I'm Jackie Bocco. I'm with the Northwood Four Corners Civic Association. I also do the newsletter and website for the Civic Federation. I'm co-hosting tonight, and I have been muting you, and I will continue to mute you if there's noise that, and you're not actually speaking. So we're going to try and keep it, sort of quiet except for the speakers. So bear with us. Thanks.
Barbara? You're still muted, Barbara. I could introduce you, but unmute. You're still muted, Barbara. We'll come back. Sue Schumacher. And you're muted too. So you people are going to have to mute yourselves if you're going to say something. Alan Myers, let's try you.
I can unmute. Alan Myers, president of the Maplewood Citizens Association of Bethesda.
Brian Van Brackle.
Hello, we're Bryant and Tina Van Brackle from the Woodside Civic Association. We've been here since 1983.
Great, thank you for joining us. Amy? So you unmuted, Amy, but we can't hear you. So we're going to move on to Joan.
Okay, I think you mean Joan Beerweiler.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Joan.
We have two Joans. I'm Joan Beerweiler. I'm president of the Aspen Hill Community Organization.
Thank you, Joan. Jason.
I believe you mean me.
You.
Okay, I'm Jason Satori. I am from the planning department, and I live in the Springfield community.
Right, Lisa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa. I'm from the planning department, and I live in downtown Silver Spring.
Carrie. Hi, Carrie.
Hello, my name is Carrie Corpy. I live in the Woodside neighborhood and am part of the Woodside Civic Association and studying the zoning issue for our association.
Thank you, Carrie. Toba? We'll skip over Toba and go to.
No, I'm Toba Hausner. I'm from the Indian Spring
community.
Hey, Toba.
And Alan invited me, so here I am.
Thank you. Joe?
Yes, good evening. I'm Joe Awkward. You heard from our president earlier, Maplewood Association, Joe Awkward. I'm the vice president. Glad to be with you guys tonight. A lot of good topics to talk about. Joe
Kira?
Awkward.
Thank you, Joe. Kira?
Hi, I'm Kira Luders. I'm president of the Parkwood Residents Association, and Parkwood is part of both Kensington and Bethesda.
Thank you. Very helpful. Andre? You're still muted, Andre.
Okay now?
Yes.
My name's Andre Meisnix, and I live in the North Quarter townhome community that's being newly constructed. I'm also a member of the Randolph Civic Association, the vice president on the board.
We're so good to have Randolph back with us. Pete?
Good to be here.
Pete Salinger.
Hi, everybody. I'm on the board of the Springfield Civic Association, which is in Bethesda, and I'm the zoning chair.
Thank you. Joan Cohen.
I'm Joan Cohen, and I live in Aspen Hill since 1972.
Dick Coffinger.
This is where the fun begins.
Get myself unmuted. My name is Dick Coffinger. I live up in the Lay Hill area of the county off of Lay Hill Road. And I guess my distinguishing characteristic is I've been coming to Civic Fed meetings for a little over 35 years.
Thank you, Dick. Phyllis and stuff.
With a patented irritation defense.
I'm Phyllis Edelman. I live in Springfield, in Bethesda, and I've been involved in zoning for many, many years.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. Naomi.
Hi, I'm Naomi Spinrad. I live in Chevy Chase West, former vice president for development in our neighborhood association, and I'm also a residential representative on the Bethesda Downtown Implementation Advisory Committee.
Okay. I switched screens, so crazy things just happen. Hesse Harris?
You gave me.
Hi, can you?
Yeah, we can hear you, Hesse. You're muted now.
Okay.
Now we can hear you.
Great. Okay. Well, I live in off Lay Hills. The other gentleman does, Silver Spring, and just learning about the issues.
Thank you, Hesse. Roger.
Hi, I'm Roger Payton from Rosemary Hills.
Stephen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen Chivoni. I'm in Timberwood in Silver Spring.
Let's see, Valerie.
Dude, can you, Jesus. Hi, this is Valerie Barr. I'm also from Rosemary Hills, near downtown Silver Spring.
We'll do a few more since Valerie just disappeared. Ben Shows, introduce yourself. Where do you live?
Ben Schaus, Rosemary Hills as well.
Thank you very much. Bruce Lawson.
I'm Bruce Lawson, and I'm a part of the Woodside Community Association.
Thank you very much. Bob Oshel.
Bob Oshel, Vice President of Woodside Park, immediately north of downtown Silver Spring, and just across George Avenue to the east from our friends in Woodside.
We'll do a few more, and don't be insulted if we don't get to everybody. Barbara Sosnick. Barbara not with us. Brandy Brooks.
Hi, everyone. Brandy Brooks. I live in Kensington.
Thank you very much. Carrie Lamari.
Kerry Labari. I live off Norbeck Road, and I'm past president of the Civic Federation.
All right, we're going to do four more. Paul Jaranowski.
Paul Jarasinski, President Cherrywood.
Joyce.
Joyce Quads, board member of the Edgemore Citizens Association and live in the Edgemore neighborhood of Bethesda.
Thank you. Irene Lane.
Good evening. My name is Irene Lane. I'm on the town council for the town of Chevy Chase. Thanks.
And Eileen Finnegan. Eileen, is that you? Well, I think that's Eileen. So thank you, everybody, for the, Eileen doesn't have.
She has no mic.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. The next order of business is the approval of the agenda. Find the agenda on page 2 of our newsletter. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Oh, wave.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? The opposite, any abstentions? Thank you very much. The next thing is the approval of the minutes, which are on page 26 of the newsletter, the minutes of the March general meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So move.
Seconded?
Seconded.
Been first and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions? Thank you very much. The minutes are approved. Next order of business is the treasurer report. Jerry Garson.
For the 30 days that just ended, we actually had no activity. But so far this year, we've had a total revenues of $1,433, and we had expenses of $1,421, leaving us with a net income of $11. If anyone has any questions, please get back to me. I'd also like to make an announcement. We're going to have a transportation committee meeting on Tuesday, April 20th at 7 p.m., which will have a briefing on the I-495, I-270 public-private partnership, which will have the people who are planning the I-270, 495 from the American Legion Bridge to I-270 will give a brief overview, and they'll explain what's happening, and then we will open it to questions. Everyone in the Civic Federation is invited to the meeting, even though it's just a transportation committee meeting, but this is of interest to a lot more people than just the transportation committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Any more announcements for the good of the order? Anybody want to announce something going on in their neighborhood? Seeing no other people wanting to make an announcement, let's jump in.
Actually, I do have something to say. I'm just a little late getting unmuted. I'm Bob Oshel from Woodside Park. On Thursday, the planning board will be considering a United Therapeutics building that's immediately adjacent to homes and townhouses in Woodside Park. And the planning board has concluded that because there is parking on the townhouse property, it is not either vacant or residential, and therefore the normal setback requirements do not apply, and the normal step back requirements for angling the building back do not apply. This would apply to us, but it also would apply to 24 other townhouse communities around the county that we've identified. So if you live in a townhouse community and you're adjacent to an EOF zone, you want to be cognizant of what's going on at the planning board. I think we're in the process of making sure all the other townhouse communities know that, but anyway, I'll say it here tonight too. So that's that.
Thanks for bringing that to our attention, Bob. Any more announcements? Well, let's jump right into our program. We're very lucky to have two experts from the Montgomery County Planning Department speaking to us on missing middle housing. I think all the people on the call know what an interesting and impactful decision that will be if the county council decides to include this concept in the general plan and perhaps as zoning amendments. But let's let the experts speak about them. I've asked them to talk for about, what did I say, Lisa, a half hour?
Yes.
for about a half hour, and then we'll open up to questions, and then we'll go for as long as practical. And at the end, everybody, we've drafted an article to recognize the contributions of Congressman Jamie Raskin as impeachment managers earlier this year. And we'd like the delegates to consider its approval. So without further ado, Lisa and Jason, please take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alan. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
And hopefully you should be able to see can you see my screen as well?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So first, thank you very much for having us today. And I have to say, as someone who served for, I think, a total of 8 years on a couple of different neighborhood community associations, including 4 years on the Springfield Civic Association board with 3 people who are here today, with Phyllis, Cynthia, and Pete, my good friends and neighbors, and who I miss serving on our board with. I always enjoy the opportunity to get to speak to you guys, and I know we always appreciate that you guys have us whenever we have a lot of big things going on. So I know we've presented before on things like the bicycle master plan, the pedestrian master plan, the update to the subdivision staging policy. And so we always enjoy getting the opportunity to talk to you all and get feedback from you guys on the things that we're doing. And so thank you for having us tonight. Again, my name is Jason Satori, and I am the chief of the Countywide Planning and Policy Division at the Montgomery County Planning Department. And I'm joined this evening by Lisa Govoni, who is the Planning Department's lead housing planner. And we're here to talk about efforts related to housing policy in the county, in particular, the Planning Department's new initiative called the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative. So here's a quick outline of our plan for this presentation. I'll take some time to talk about some of the previous and even ongoing housing efforts at the Planning Department. And then I'll talk more specifically about the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative. I'm then going to pass it off to Lisa to provide some more definition to the types of housing we are targeting with this effort. And she will also walk through some data that identify the need for more of a variety of housing types in the county. We'll then close out the meeting with a Q&A session. And I would say, feel free to submit your questions at any point during our presentation. We may answer some of those questions midstream, but others we may save until the end when we open up the Q&A. I will also note that we see this as a discussion opportunity for us, as an opportunity for us to hear from you. So don't be surprised if we ask you some questions during the Q&A as well, so that we can get a better understanding of the different thoughts and perspectives that are out there on some of the things that we're tackling. So I'm going to begin by setting a little bit of a context here. The Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative is really part of an ongoing, extensive, multi-year effort by the county and the Planning Department. It includes several studies that are shown here, which evaluated different aspects of housing in the county. And if you'd like, we can talk more about some of the results of these studies or some of the specific findings of these studies during the Q&A. But all of the efforts that you see on this page, on this slide, have been described as being pieces of the housing puzzle, with no one piece being the solution to all of our housing concerns. We need all of these pieces in order to solve the puzzle. And the product of this initiative, the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative, is just one more piece of that puzzle, but certainly not the only piece. The point I want to make with this slide is that there is a lot of context here. In addition to the studies, the county has updated the MPDU policy to require higher shares of affordable housing in areas of the county with higher income levels, made it easier for property owners to add accessory dwelling units to their properties, agreed to a set of housing targets for the county and the region as a whole, created a new tax incentive program for residential development on WMATA sites, adopted the new growth and infrastructure policy, which is the new name for the subdivision staging policy, and with the adoption of the new policy, eliminated the residential development moratorium. And this Friday, the council will also take up the HOC production fund in their budget review, which will help produce new mixed income housing in the county. And last Thursday, the planning board approved its draft of Thrive Montgomery 2050, the county's most comprehensive update to our general plan in more than 50 years. It establishes the county's vision for our future. And if you will, I think of it as the image that we are trying to put together with our different puzzle pieces. And that image includes a focus on increasing the diversity of housing in our county to improve opportunities for more people. So this effort, the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative, is a big piece of that puzzle. In many ways, the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative serves as the county's first opportunity to implement elements of Thrive. We've also spent the better part of the last 3 years working on missing middle housing. Lisa will talk more about what missing middle means in a little bit. One of the studies you saw listed on the previous slide was the missing middle housing study from 2018, and that study has helped guide our housing conversations over the last few years. We've also had several recent master plans with elements focused on missing middle housing, such as the Forest Glen and the Veers Mill plans. However, in the absence of zones or a development process that specifically targets missing middle housing, we've had to rely on rezoning parcels to mixed use zones to be able to allow the desired housing product. And even then, the desired housing product, for instance, a triplex, may not actually be allowed by zoning. So while master plans may be a good approach to targeting areas for missing middle housing, it's not if our zoning doesn't allow for that type of housing. So part of this effort is to identify better ways to achieve the desired housing mix. In the context of our ongoing Silver Spring downtown and adjacent communities plan, we recently conducted a missing middle market analysis that has provided some pretty valuable insight into the feasibility of building or obtaining different types of housing. And as mentioned previously, Thrive Montgomery 2050 has a major focus on housing related, including the addition of missing middle housing. And then finally, Zoning Text Amendment 2007, which was introduced last year by Councilmember Will Jawando, that directly addressed missing middle housing around metro stations. Whereas a draft amendment, ZTA, circulated by Councilmember Hans Remer, facilitates missing middle housing along our main corridors. The point is that there has been a wide range of efforts related to missing middle and attainable housing over the years. This is not an impulsive or spontaneous effort, and it's not being given short shrift. In fact, the Attainable Housing Strategies effort is intended to comprehensively and cohesively weave many of these different efforts together to spur the development of more desired housing. And given all that we've done already, and given the recommendations in Thrive, and given other similar efforts across the country, the County Council believes that this is a ripe opportunity to develop a strategy and take action to diversify the county's housing stock. In light of this, the Council sent us a request to consider and recommend, quote, zoning reforms that would allow greater opportunities for missing middle housing in Montgomery County. And so the Planning Department responded by creating the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative to identify viable options for more existing and future residents of the county to find homes at the right sizes, the right locations, and the right price points for their needs. And key to this is expanding opportunities specifically for homeownership in the county. So it's not just rental units, but for sale units that provide previously marginalized communities with increased opportunities to build wealth. The market in Montgomery County has not done well in providing housing options for middle income households, for first-time home buyers, or for residents who want to downsize and age in place on a fixed income. If you have a high income level, housing in Montgomery County is certainly attainable, but it's not for a lot of others. And given that Montgomery County is a mature suburban county with limited opportunities for greenfield development, this effort really needs to be focused on growing our housing supply in places with limited available space. So this is the question we have before us. How can we diversify and expand housing options in Montgomery County? And what will be, that will be followed by questions about what types of housing and where should it be located? What needs to be changed to allow it to happen? And what needs to change to make it even feasible or even likely to happen? So this really requires that we reassess our longstanding patterns of residential development in the county. Meaning we need to look at neighborhoods that have been zoned exclusively for single family homes And we need to understand our ability to densify our corridors with more diverse infill housing. So we'll be looking at our zoning code and reviewing the development standards that we have in place. We also need to look at the development review process as part of this whole thing and how that comes into play in obtaining the desired housing. These are all concepts that have been identified previously through our studies and other initiatives, and people will continue to have opportunities to provide feedback on specific proposals later in the process as we hone in on those different solutions. And I don't think I can emphasize enough that at the root of this is an effort to make our communities more equitable and more inclusive by countering the historical discriminatory aspects of zoning. Zoning determines what can be built where, and by limiting housing options, we've limited who has access to different neighborhoods, which has led to neighborhoods that are homogeneous racially, ethnically, and economically. If we want to diversify our communities and even diversify our schools, we need to focus on diversifying our housing options. Jurisdictions in states all across the country, from California to Massachusetts and from Minnesota to Texas, are pursuing efforts to undo the discriminatory impacts of zoning. But this is not easy given decades of entrenched development patterns in mature suburban counties like Montgomery County. And it's not only about zoning. Discriminatory lending practices and restrictive covenants have also led to deep disparities in wealth and home ownership. And making home ownership more attainable with more equitable, mixed income neighborhoods is one way that we can work to reverse these historical inequities. One thing to keep in mind is that the attainable housing we're talking about in this effort, and Lisa will help provide more of a definition to this in just a few seconds, is not income restricted affordable housing. It's market rate housing that generally will be more affordable than the typical new detached single family home due to its smaller size. And so while it doesn't address affordable housing, there are other pieces of the puzzle that do that. This effort will provide opportunities to make homeownership more attainable to more households. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to see if she can provide some more definition to the terms we are using on this project.
Thanks, Jason. I'm Lisa Govoni, and I work on housing policy for the department. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces around here. If I have one regret, it's that we're not in a sterile conference room in the executive office room over PowerPoint, but I'm really happy to be here tonight. So you probably noticed by now that this initiative is titled the Attainable Housing Strategies, and it's not solely focused on missing middle, although missing middle is a big part of this initiative. So what is attainable housing? Attainable housing is unsubsidized market rate housing that is appropriate and suitable for the households that live here. Like Jason said, attainable housing is not income restricted housing. There's a growing recognition that while yes, we need to build more income restricted affordable housing, we also just need to build more housing, period. Generally, attainable housing will be more affordable than the typical new detached single family home due to its smaller size and smaller lot size. And implicit in this idea of attainability is that there exists a range of housing options that exist in the local market for a range of household incomes and preferences. Attainable housing includes, but is not limited to, missing middle housing. And we'll go through the scale and types of housing included in the term attainable housing in the future slides. Next slide. A big part of attainable housing is missing middle housing, something that we've been talking and studying for the past 3 years. And missing middle housing is housing that generally refers to a range of building types that are compatible in scale, form, and construction with single-family homes, but includes multiple housing units. Missing middle housing can provide a transition from low-density single-family neighborhoods to high-density apartment, retail, and office districts. The best opportunities to create missing middle housing potentially include changes to single-family zones in these transition areas to allow missing middle housing production. But to be clear, these actions will not eliminate single-family neighborhoods. It may result in some single-family homes being replaced in a compatible form if a property owner decides to take advantage of future zoning changes or a developer combines multiple properties. The goal of missing middle housing is to allow Montgomery County residents to access more choices in housing to meet their needs. Next slide. When we talk about attainable housing, this graphic is a great representation of how we're visualizing in terms of scale. It's the famous Optico's missing middle diagram modified to show the various scales of housing. We are working on creating a vision that is unique to housing in Montgomery County that we want to see. So we're working on our own version of this graphic, which should be available soon, and we'll be more than happy to share it. But for this initiative, we primarily want to focus on the types of housing we are not getting currently. This includes duplexes, triplexes, small apartment buildings, like quads at the house scale end, but also products on the right side of this picture that are not house scale and may be more appropriate for our transit corridors, like stacked triplexes or 2/2 types of products. Obviously, there's some fluidity to this scale, but importantly, we want to focus on the house scale product in our single family neighborhoods, but the largest product that we would like to see more along our BRT corridors. To go into that a little bit deeper, at the small scale side, we have house scale product, the duplexes, the triplexes, the fourplexes, courtyard apartments, bungalow courts, and accessory dwelling units that are generally 2 to 2.5 stories, medium scale stacked flat apartment buildings, 2/2s, larger townhouses that are generally 3 to 4 stories, and at the large scale end, mixed use live work buildings, stacked flat apartment buildings that are 4 to 5 stories. And yes, I caught something in the chat. All of these pictures in the slideshow are missing middle that exists in Montgomery County right now. But within the various scales of attainable housing, there is some overlap, but really implicit in this idea is that a range of attainable housing is that Montgomery County has diverse housing with diverse housing needs. And we'll be examining what that mix looks like throughout this initiative. Next slide. So here's a picture. We're going to go through a couple of pictures of what that scale would look like. So on the small scale side, we have a picture of EU that's in Kentlands and a triplex that's on Thayer Ave in Silver Spring. It's one of my favorite pictures, this triplex, because no one ever believes it's a triplex unless you look really carefully and see that there's 3 mailboxes. And that's how you know. Next slide. Median scale includes product like townhouses, which is a product that we're pretty familiar with in Montgomery County. And you can see that Park Potomac we use to illustrate scale, although they are, pretty big townhouses over there. But we also have the 2/2 product, which you can see in Kentland. You can only tell that they're not traditional houses by looking at the number of doors. You can see that they're a unit on top of a unit, 2 floors each. Next slide. For large scale, this is a project that we really like that's located on Georgia Avenue near Walter Reed. You can't tell from the outside, but there's actually 3 stacked units on top of each other. This is the kind of product we'd like to see along our BRT corridors. It's certainly not house scale, but nor is it appropriate for the interior of a neighborhood, but it is a gentle density. From the outside, it looks like luxury townhouses, but each column is actually 3 stacked units. Next slide. So why do we need changes to build this type of product in Montgomery County? Generally speaking, many of the existing missing middle housing structures could not be built under the current standards in single family zones. While many of the single family zones in Montgomery County do allow for some missing middle type of housing, namely the duplex and townhouses, there are additional requirements to build missing middle types in the single family zones, which are requirements that do not exist to build a tear down rebuild of a single family detached unit. These additional requirements include process. It requires a discretionary planning department review to achieve these building types through something we call the optional method of development, which generally means that instead of going straight to DPS to get your permit to build, you get additional density, but you have to come into the planning department for review. There's also affordable housing requirements. The Montgomery County zoning ordinance requires all optional method projects to fulfill affordable housing requirements of MPDUs, even if the project has less than 20 units. This added cost to small projects, including small infill projects, the type we want to see, will make it too costly or infeasible to build. There's also a usable area requirement. Optional method projects have a usable area requirement that require finding or assembling around 3 to 5 acres, which is increasingly difficult to find in most of our transit accessible neighborhoods down county. For example, R60 requires 3 acres of usable area. Now, when we talk about the larger scale side of attainable housing, the type of housing that we want to see along our corridors, the impediment's probably not our zoning code. We know we have the CRN zone, which is our least dense mixed use zone that will probably work for that. But But we also need to look at other impediments that may include the market and how to figure out how to get those products built in Montgomery County. So one of the biggest reasons that attainable housing is important is because Montgomery County's communities have diverse needs in terms of housing. That includes affordability, but also size and the type of housing. It's a great way to increase access to homeownership. The units are typically smaller in size than a new single-family detached unit, and their smaller size can help make them more affordable. It's also a gentle density that allows the county to increase its housing supply. The county has not built enough housing to keep up with demand, and current housing options are often not affordable to middle-income residents, making it difficult for existing residents to remain in the county. Attainable housing can provide new housing options for existing and new residents to find homes at the right size and price point for their needs to help Montgomery County grow its housing supply. There's also environmental benefits, allowing a gentle density near employment and transit in our high opportunity neighborhoods can help reduce VMT. Finally, we mentioned this earlier, but building missing middle is an important step the county can take in addressing past inequities in housing choice and recognizing the deep disparities that were created from redlining and the legacy of single family zoning. Next slide. I want to take a little bit of time to talk about the COG housing targets and how we fit into this, because I think that's a really important point, and I know there's been a lot of confusion about them. So I want to give a little context on what they are and how they were created to set the stage. So as part of a cooperative process with Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, the COG, the Planning Department produces a long-range forecast of population, employment, and housing for Montgomery County. And forecasts are based on analysis of data from a variety of sources, including local development, population, economic trends, models of Washington, D.C. population, including economic base, and published state and federal statistical resources. While the Montgomery County Planning Board does not have planning and zoning authority over the municipalities of Rockville and Gaithersburg, Montgomery County's forecast does include both Gaithersburg and Rockville. So Montgomery County's forecasted household growth for the 2020-2030 period is 31,000 households, which is 13% of the region-wide growth expected during the same period. Of the anticipated growth of 31,000 households, Montgomery County, excluding Rockville and Gaithersburg, has an anticipated growth of 23,000 households, which is 10% of the total regional household forecast growth. The city of Rockville has an anticipated growth of 5,000 households, and the city of Gaithersburg has an anticipated growth of 3,000 households. So when it comes to determining the housing targets, at the recommendations of the region's planning directors, COG staff proposed distributing the needed 75,000 units region-wide, the 75,000 additional housing units, based on each jurisdiction's share of the forecasted household growth between 2020 and 2030. So remember, Montgomery County's, their share is 13%. Montgomery County, excluding Rockville and Gaithersburg, is 13% is 10%. So we have a share of an additional 10,000 units. The 10,000 additional units needed for the county include the jurisdictions of Rockville and Gaithersburg. Of that 10,000, Montgomery County, just Montgomery County, not Rockville and Gaithersburg, has a share of around 7,000 to 8,000 units because of rounding. 1,000 would be is allocated to Rockville, and another 1,000 would be allocated to the city of Gaithersburg. Next slide. And to illustrate that further of what that looks like in terms of housing production, this graph shows two things. It shows our declining housing production and where we need to be to meet our COG housing goals. You can see that the forecasted, that is that 31,000 is in orange. It's kind of divided up by year. And that green is that additional, what we need to meet our housing goals. Next slide. And we mentioned today that one of the things that we wanted to highlight in the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative is this idea of increasing access to home ownership. And this chart really highlights that need. The household income required to afford the median home value in Montgomery County is almost $20,000 more than the actual median household income. And another thing you can notice with this graph is that the median household income has remained relatively flat since 2010, while home prices have obviously increased over the same time. putting home ownership out of reach for many Montgomery County residents. Next slide. And so we looked at home prices for 2020 and divided and looked at them by type of housing. In 2020, the average detached home was sold for $775,000, which is compared to $370,000 for attached structures. The graph on the screen shows various housing sale prices ranges for houses sold in 2020. You have the blue bar showing condos, the orange bar showing detached structures, and the green bar showing attached structures. From this graph, you can tell that most attached structures were sold for under $400,000, and most detached structures were sold for over $600,000. We show this to highlight the differences between the various structure types and the potential impact that size has on affordability. Next slide. Single-family homes in Montgomery County are also getting larger. They've increased by over 130% in gross floor area since the typical home was built in the 1950s. I want to note that a lot of these larger homes that are being built today are tear-down rebuilds, which are when smaller, relatively more affordable single-family home is torn down and replaced with a much larger, more expensive home. Under current zoning, this is allowed by right, which means you can go straight to the Department of Permitting Services for a building permit, and it requires no review by the Planning Department. It's a relatively easy process compared to the additional processes highlighted earlier required to build missing middle in this county in the same zones. The hope is with this project is that a lot of these teardown rebuilds that may occur today in the future will result in multiple more attainable housing units than a rebuild of a more expensive single family detached unit. I also want to highlight, if we don't make these necessary changes now, we run the risk of our neighborhoods slowly losing their diversity of our neighborhoods. And we've heard a lot from a lot of you that this is something that you cherish. Slowly over time, neighborhoods will transform through the teardown rebuild process that will result in a loss of affordability in these neighborhoods. This is something that we're seeing increasingly in the western part of the county, but we're seeing an increasing frequency in the eastern side too. Even small, modest numbers of duplexes and triplexes could help combat this. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Jason to talk a little bit about timeline.
Okay, so thank you, Lisa. This is our general timeline for the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative. You can tell that we have a pretty tight turnaround, having committed to transmitting recommendations to the County Council by the end of June. And while this may seem ambitious, as we indicated earlier, we don't feel like we're starting from scratch. And the vast majority of our major milestones that you see here are activities related to gathering feedback from the community and other stakeholders. We had one community meeting last month and have two others scheduled, one for next Wednesday and one for May 24th. We also had our first set of virtual office hours last Friday, and we have two others scheduled for later in April and also in June. The office hours are kind of our way to provide people a more personalized opportunity to ask questions on a more of a one-on-one type of basis and to provide comments directly to us as well. We also have created an external advisory team called the Housing Equity Advisory Team, or HEAT. The HEAT consists of stakeholders that approach this issue from different perspectives. It includes developers, both for-profit and nonprofit, a realtor, civic activists, housing advocates, an economist, and someone from the banking industry. And two members of the HEAT, Carrie Lamari and Karen Cordry, are on the call this evening. While the HEAT will, to be clear, the HEAT will not be asked to come to a consensus. We don't expect that they would be able to, or to even make recommendations to the planning board collectively as a group. We are hopeful that the members of the HEAT, though, will provide us, the planning staff, with an understanding of their different perspectives and their different knowledge about housing policy. Ultimately, the planning staff will present our recommendations to the planning board in June, at which point people will have additional opportunities to provide comments directly to the board. It's anticipated that the County Council will take up any policy review in the fall, which will afford people yet another opportunity to provide feedback before any policy is implemented. And this slide gives you a sense of the types of things that we'll be looking at over the next couple of months. It's a variety of policy tools that allow and encourage more diverse housing types. So we'll talk about zoning text amendments, or ZTAs. of which there are three different types. Again, ZTAs are changes to the text of the zoning ordinance. It's not changing what a property is zoned as. It's changing the text of the ordinance. So the changes generally fall into three categories. One, like Councilmember Jawando's ZTA 2007, which changes the uses that are allowed in our existing zones. The second type includes ZTAs like Councilmember Reimers, which again was not introduced. It was just a draft one that he circulated. Those types change the development standards and what's allowed based on the application method and the benefits provided by the developer. And the third, which creates a new zone or a new overlay zone that could then be, that those new zones could allow for the types of desired land uses that we don't currently allow with any of our existing zones. And then those new zones can be applied to particular areas of the county. However, that last type of ZTA really requires the rezoning of land, which occurs in two ways. First, following council adoption of a master plan, when we implement zoning changes through a sectional map amendment. We also have local map amendments, which are rezonings requested by a property owner for a specific parcel, and these occur outside of a master plan process. And then we're also going to talk about other types of policies, catalyst policies, other policies that can help encourage or facilitate the production of the types of housing we would like to see. And so I'll end with this last slide, and then we'll turn to the Q&A. But I just want to highlight ways to stay involved. Again, we have our next set of office hours on April 27th. These are in the afternoon, these two from 3 to 5. We also have our next community meeting next Wednesday at 7 p.m. And that community meeting, if you participate in our last one, may be a little different. I think we're going to try to do breakout rooms so we can have more group discussions at this one. You can also sign up for our housing e-letter, where we're going to give regular updates on the progress we're making on this effort. And you can do all of these things by going to our website, and we'll make this available, Alan, and ask you to pass it along so people can just directly click on the links. But this is where you can sign up. You can also email us your questions or comments at our email addresses here. And so with that, I guess, Alan, I don't know if you want us to turn it over to you to facilitate the questions. I see 32 chats. I haven't been able to follow them, so I don't know how many of those are questions or how many of those are cheering for the presentation that we've given. So
we've got great questions in the chat. Jackie, able to help with the questions?
If you like, if neither of you can see them in the chat yourself, I can just go down the list of the questions that were asked.
Let me take the opportunity to ask this question. Lisa, you said that one of your favorite houses was triplex on Bayer Avenue. How did that get approved under the current zoning for East Silver Spring?
Long story short, it didn't. It's very old. It's been there for a while, so it was grandfathered into the current zone, from my understanding.
Okay, thank you very much. Jackie, please.
First question is, you're doing attainable housing, but how are $700,000 new townhouses affordable, attainable?
Great question, and I'll be honest, that's we get that question quite a lot. I think so. I would say that the most important thing is that we're comparing it to new teardown rebuilds, which generally start over $1 million. And so is a $700,000 townhouse more affordable than a teardown? Yes. And that's the kind of transformation that we're seeing of our neighborhoods. And we think that's an important point of distinction. We are also looking at ways through size limitations and lot sizes, to make them smaller so that they're more affordable by a scale of size. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. But we're also looking at just understanding the attainability indicators in different neighborhoods in Montgomery County. As you know, one of the challenges to doing this countywide is that the for sale market and land costs vary quite differently in Chevy Chase and Aspen Hill and all of the different neighborhoods in Montgomery County. So we want to better understand what the attainability challenges are in the different neighborhoods. So we're going to be looking at that in the next couple of weeks, and we hope to release that to the public so that they can also understand the challenges that we face.
Okay, another question is, Why is the planning department discussing these ZTAs before the council's had any public input on the Thrive 2050?
So the zoning text amendment ZTA 20-07 was introduced before the planning board took up the review of Thrive Montgomery 2050. Part of the attainable housing strategies is putting a pause on Councilmember Jowando's ZTA and also Councilmember Reamer's ZTA, and to look at them through the lens of Thrive Montgomery 2050. We will certainly be reviewing the council will be reviewing the Thrive plan over the next couple of months, but we hope to take information that we learned from that and put it into the recommendations here.
I would just add to that, just kind of emphasize Lisa's point that was introduced and it was already, it was introduced in December. That's Councilmember Jowando's ZTA, and it already had a public hearing, and that was going to be moving forward. And we really, at the planning department, we were really trying to advocate for kind of slowing down a little bit on these to try to weave together a strategy that took a look at what was proposed in that ZTA, what Councilmember Jowando Reamer was proposing in his ZTA, and the things that we'd been hearing over the last 3 years as we were having conversations in the community about Thrive. And so, and as these go forward, Thrive has already moved on now to the council. It will have a public hearing sometime soon. And then as the council takes that up, they'll kind of be doing these hand in hand. So they'll be able to kind of, as they're working on elements of Thrive, they'll be able to work on an element that implements aspects of it at the same exact time.
And the council has final say in this too. So, they'll be understand to look at them hand in hand and to make sure that they are, one, taking in the input for the Thrive public hearing and incorporating that as needed. So we do see them as kind of a balancing act between the two.
So after the public input will come in after this is all done?
So we've actually had 3 years of public input through Thrive. So Thrive was just recently sent from the planning board to the council. We had over 100 public engagement things on Thrive. Over 100 people, almost 100 people showed up to the Thrive public hearing. And we've been incorporating that feedback into the draft of Thrive as we see fit. So we will continue to receive feedback and we will continue to look at what needs to be integrated. But we see the public engagement loop as continuous through this project.
Another question was, has anyone conducted a focus group on what home buyers want, not just the planning department? I mean, you're saying public input, but is that what you're assuming? They're home buyers? People want to buy homes?
So I think that we have done a significant amount of research on the for sale market in Montgomery County, and there's a lot of people that want to get in. I can certainly share that data with you on how constrained the for sale market is. I think that we can see from successes. I'll bring up a condo project in Silver Spring, the Octave, where we saw smaller units, and a lot of them went to first-time home buyers as successful. We are also looking at just, the value of housing in Montgomery County. And I think that that's something that we'll be looking at through the lens of this project.
Another question is, if you increase the density, who's going to pay for the infrastructure to support those additional people and cars and children in schools?
So we'll still have impact taxes. We will certainly, through this project, figure out what the role of impact taxes will be, if they will be charged the attached rate or multifamily rate, but that's something that we will be figuring this out, but we don't see the impact taxes going away.
Another question is, how will you ensure compatibility, which is in the code now, but often not required of new buildings, especially large homes that replace tear downs?
It's a great question. That's one we've heard a lot too. We're looking at a couple of things. One thing we're looking at is pattern books. That is something that we'll work with the Department of Permitting Services on pre-approved drawings that could be compatible with that existing neighborhood. We'll also be looking at what controls we can put in the zoning code to ensure compatibility. So this is something that we're still evaluating through, but something we do think is important through this initiative.
Is the Missing Middle going to have only multifamily sort of buildings?
by multifamily, do you mean like small apartment buildings or?
I'm just relaying the question.
Sure. So missing middle can be anything from, 2 units to something around a small apartment building at 19. That's probably too much for the interior of a single family neighborhood. I think we're mostly looking at house scale, types of duplexes, triplexes probably for the interior of the neighborhoods. A lot of what we'll be looking at is locational criteria through this of what is appropriate in different locations in Montgomery County, whether you're on the edge of a business district like Silver Spring, or whether you're in the interior of a neighborhood or you're along a BRT corridor. That's something that we have to evaluate through this initiative.
Another question, once small scale housing is in place, if you get this put in place, what would keep it from being upzoned during the next sector plan?
I can't speak to the future. I think that's something we evaluate on a master plan basis. That's why we have that process. I think a countywide initiative like this will be looking at the county as a whole, but that doesn't mean that we don't need our master plan processes to evaluate, specific parcels, conversations with the community and the development community about the appropriateness of what type of housing we want to see, or office or retail.
So what guarantees that the missing middle housing is going to be compatible with the existing neighborhoods? Is there architectural review and approval?
Like I said, that's something that we're looking at. We're looking at pattern books, design guidelines, what controls we can have in the zoning code. I would say, the most difficult part, and I think a lot of you have already hit on this, is we're competing with the buy right process for tear down rebuilds. And so if we want to compete with that process, we want to make sure that this is easy to build and our process is not burdensome. But on the other hand, we understand how important neighborhood compatibility, the physical character of the neighborhood is. And so we want to build in controls there too.
Question says, the possibility was mentioned for developers to buy up several lots and have them combined. This is contrary to the re-subdivision criteria. Will this not be something that will pass muster at the planning department?
So a couple of things is the zoning text amendment 20-07 allows for the assemblage of up to like 25,000 square feet for this type of housing. Through this initiative, we are looking at what if subdivision regulations need to change. I don't have an answer for you tonight. We can certainly, when we have our recommendations, we can have another follow-up conversation on that. But that is just something that we're evaluating right now.
And I would say that one of the points that Lisa made earlier was that under our existing zoning, in order to be able to do some of the types of housing that we're trying to target here, and really we're only talking about duplexes, right, Lisa? In order to do duplexes in some of our existing single family zones, you need to be going with the optional method of development, and that requires a minimum amount of land to start off with. And so you can't necessarily pursue that unless you have that amount of space, which that requires. That's under the existing. So you can't really get easily right now, you can't get a single lot that has a single family home being torn down and replaced with a duplex, because the code requires that you go the optional method, and that requires much more land.
Right. So how many missing middle units does the planning board envision being built on transit corridors? And how many of those would be affordable given the cost of land? Well, I mean, will any of them be affordable?
I think that, so we don't have, a target number. Certainly we would like to see these units get built. But in terms of affordability, we have to figure that out. I think that, like I said, attainability and affordability looks different in different parts of that county. And that's something that we need to figure out how to build into this and look and further analyze. So I don't have an answer for you on what the future looks like when these products get built, but it's something that we are looking at through our own analysis.
Well, and those corridor options too are more likely to be the larger scale projects, obviously larger scale buildings, but also more units, and they would still be subject to the MPDU requirements in terms of the number of affordable units that would need to be provided in those projects too.
What's the percentage of affordable units?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to?
Right. And
I was going to say, so we do have an MPDU requirement. So if, corridor housing, which is a little bit bigger, if they build over 20 units, we will get MPDUs through that, either 12.5% to 15%, sometimes more if they want to take advantage of a bonus density. And that is something that we will make sure stays in this. The MPDU program is like the bedrock of Montgomery County housing policy, and it's really important that that gets built, those units get built.
And how are you keeping the developers from turning everything into luxury? That's everything here is luxury. It's very expensive. How do you keep them from just buying the houses and making them into luxurious places, expensive, even if they build 2 on a lot?
So that's already happening. So we are seeing transformation of neighborhoods through the tear down rebuild process. And so we have to make a competitive process where the units are smaller and that they're more attainable than that tear down rebuild process. So we have to figure out how to make that competitive. I'm not going to say that we have the answers today. That's certainly something that we are looking into, of how to make that, at least slow down that transformation of our neighborhoods.
I think it's a good question, Jackie. And it's something that, we need to give more thought to.
Yeah, I don't know what sort of conditions you can put on them, but that seems to me that's the issue.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to stop them from getting as much money as they can get, and when there's so much demand for housing here? Anyway, another question here. What if we prefer relatively low density in our neighborhoods? It would seem that higher density is to be imposed on our neighborhoods, whether existing residents want it or not.
So I think the important thing to remember is that for the interior single family neighborhoods, we are talking about house scale density. And if it's built how we envision it to be built, you will not be able to tell a difference that it's a duplex or a triplex. And it's a gentle density that blends into your neighborhood. I bet a lot of you already have ADUs in your neighborhoods that you don't know because they blend in to your neighborhood. And that's what our goal is, that we hope comes out of this too.
Okay. There's just so many questions.
I know. At the end, we'll put our emails in the chat. So if we didn't get to anyone's question, you can certainly email us too.
Well, let's ask and answer a few more questions. What does the current Thrive 2050 draft say about naturally occurring affordable housing? And what does it say about the prospect for income restricted housing beyond MPDUs? It seems to me that you're only going to be able to, it's only going to be the tip of the iceberg to try to reduce the housing deficit through missing middle attainable housing in single family neighborhoods.
It's a great question. I mean, so, working on the Silver Spring plan, there's been a lot of talk and Thrive about missing middle housing, but preservation and MPDUs and using the HIF fund are still really important tools here. Like the missing middle is just a very small part of our housing toolkit. Jason mentioned the HOC production fund, which is, a budget item that can help HOC produce income restricted units that are lower than MPDUs. So that's a really important tool. We can generally only reach the lowest income households through direct subsidy. We've also, in a number of our master plans and through the MPDU update, expanded the MPDU program to now 15%. That's something we're looking at in Silver Spring too. Those are other things that we need to look at. It's not a one size fits all approach. We need to do everything. You don't get into a housing crisis like we are without pursuing every available tool possible.
I wanted to ask our audience, if you've got questions that weren't in the chat and you want to use the raise hand function, please do that. I saw that Naomi had one early on, and Joe Awkward, you've got one.
You need to unmute, Joe.
There you go.
Okay. So Joe Awkward with Maplewood. So I guess two things. First thing is, many single family homeowners purchased their units knowing full well what the zoning was. And by going into these established areas and changing those zonings, I just can't see that that's going to be something that most of those developments will want to see with the increased density. And then the second thing, you did talk about getting increased home ownership. And I certainly understand that getting housing available for more people to afford it that live and work in the county. But I do think one thing is very important to bring out here. I think one reality is many, you know, I know back 10, 12 years ago, there was a real push by the federal government to maximize home ownership, you know, 65, 70%. And the unfortunate reality was a lot of those homeowners could not sustain their properties. And so I guess my concern is, I just feel as a, you know, a modest homeowner here, I'm concerned that you're really, I think this is tantamount to kind of a, not, it could potentially drive out a lot of, you know, viable income to the county. And it's pretty significantly changing the, you know, the way the county has existed for many years. And I guess my final comment, I know some of this is due to, you mentioned the term redlining, things like that. Bottom line, I think that you will get some pushback on some of these covenants and redlining. I think some of these things that are being talked about today, it's not necessarily, I certainly agree that it's not an easy county to live in, but at the same time, it depends on where you choose to live and what you choose to buy. So I guess in a nutshell, I'm just concerned that, like maybe some of the others have said, I think it does feel like a bit of a frontal assault on single family homeowners in Montgomery County, I guess. And I'm concerned that you might drive out some, you know, some great citizens in the county. And I just wouldn't like to see that, but sorry to.
So thank you, Joe. So everybody else, keep your comments and questions shorter so more people can.
Yeah, apologize.
And we'll have an opportunity to talk as a group after our guests leave.
Okay.
Naomi, you've got a question.
I do. Last week, some of us saw a presentation from a developer about the cost of turning a 6,000 square foot lot in basically the BCC area into a triplex. And the baseline cost for that lot was $900,000. Going into the development costs and so on, the calculation was that for one 1,500 square foot triplex, the required household income would be $250,000 a year. The median income in the county is slightly over 100,000. How is this possibly attainable housing?
But I think I saw the same presentation. It was sent to me and it was a great presentation. I think that the presentation also highlighted that $900,000 triplex is a lot more attainable than $2.2 million home that's in Chevy Chase. And I think, you know, we talked about that earlier, that attainability and accessibility looks different in different parts of the county. And that's our job. And that's something that Jason and I have talked about, is how do we make that clear? And that is also, like, I think one of the highlights, the tension that is doing this countywide. And so we're going to try to break it up into manageable pieces throughout the county and look at it differently that way. I don't have an answer for you tonight, except, you know, highlighting what I just said about the triplex being more accessible, but it is certainly something that is weighing on us, and we need to figure out is how to better illustrate accessibility and attainability.
Well, if I may, let me add a quick follow-up to that, and that's that if that's what a 1,500 square foot essentially shared unit on a property costs in a desirable area, doesn't that foster sprawl? And I'll leave that for you to think about.
Thank you, Naomi. Phyllis, you had a question?
Yes. My question is, and maybe I missed this, did somebody mention whether there'd be a limit to how many missing middle units could be built within a community? Because one of the things no one has mentioned is that some of us live in communities where we already have these McMansions. And I wonder if somebody, you know, is moving and says, you know what, I want to split this 6,000 square foot home into 3 units. And, people say, wow, you can make a lot of money that way. I mean, I'm just wondering if people have thought about all the ramifications and if there is, as I said, a limit to how many missing middle could go into a single family home neighborhood before it changes the whole culture of that community.
So thank you for your feedback. That's not something that we have talked about, but this is why we're having conversations like these, so we can hear this kind of feedback. If I can give you any solace, is that the city of Minneapolis loosened up their zoning code to allow triplexes by right, and they got 3 the first year. So I don't think we're going to see widespread transformation overnight. I don't even think we'll, I think we'll see hopefully incremental changes in our, we'll see the tear down becomes a duplex or a triplex or that kind of change, but I don't think it will be widespread overnight. But we will look at your question. So thank you.
Alan,
Thank you.
Just a statement. San Francisco is a very progressive city. I think they've tried everything that you're looking at, including accessory apartments and houses above garages. The median income for San Francisco is $2 million, median housing price rather, is $2 million. I mean, and people can't afford to live there. They have to share. If you go on their real estate, they're saying, we want to share a house so 2 families move in together just so they can afford to live there. And I just sort of think we're headed in the same path. And that's just a statement from me.
Thank you, Alan. Kerry?
Yeah, I live within walking distance of downtown Silver Spring, and the planning department itself describes the vacancy rate in commercial space down there as dire. And yet we're looking at changing the adjacent communities and not necessarily looking at utilizing and repurposing commercial space for housing. And I wonder why that's not more of a focus.
So that's not true. We are looking at adaptive reuse of office buildings. We've seen a couple already in Silver Spring. The issue with adapting an office space is that it requires certain specifications. Like you can't have a central core. They can't be too big. There's a lot of other issues about light. So, and it's also very, very expensive. So that's why you don't see it, commonly happening in Montgomery County, but it's something I promise you that we are pursuing and looking at through the Silver Spring plan.
Any more questions in the chat? People who are on the call want to raise their hand and talk to the experts. Jackie, any more questions in the chat?
There are a ton of them and they're very long, so it's a little hard to see which ones haven't been answered. I'll just go to this one I'm on now. I don't even know what it says. I'm just reading it. While the Thrive initiative may have been going on for 3 years, the document that has just been released isn't the same as the idea shared 2 or 3 years ago in public meetings. The document just released isn't even the same as the one that was released earlier. So isn't it disingenuous to say that you have been sharing those ideas for 2 or 3 years in public meetings? Haven't your ideas for Thrive evolved in that time?
Well, I'm going to let Lisa respond after. Because she's been intimately involved with Thrive over the last 3 years. But, it's kind of what the public policy process is and the way these types of plans are developed. And it's not that we've been telling people our ideas for 3 years. For 3 years, we've been listening to the community. And, Lisa mentioned over 100 community events. It was 166 community engagement events that occurred over the last 3 years. Most of those occurred before the pandemic began, and it was mostly listening type of sessions. And so over the past year or so, we've seen an evolving document, but the concepts and the ideas are still, kind of the same ideas, the same goals and actions, and the plan. Just what evolved over the last couple of months was kind of a reformatting of it and a restructuring of it. But the nice thing is that what we have before us right now is a clean copy that is the planning board draft that is being submitted, has been submitted now to the county council. That is what is available for people to provide their public testimony on directly to the county council. And that is what the council will be working off of. So there's still opportunity for it to be molded and to change over the course of the next few months as the council works on it. I don't know, Lisa, if you had anything else you wanted to
No, I think that you mentioned it. I have been involved in every iteration for Thrive for the past 3 years. It's been a progression. There's been, one of the reasons that the Thrive draft was streamlined through the most thing is because we got feedback that it was too long, too bulky, and it was hard to understand. And so we took that feedback in and integrated, and how can we streamline this document that the content that we went to the community with is still there, but the document is more readable and easily accessible to the average citizen. So that's what I have to say.
One of the questions I saw in the chat had to do with impact taxes and the observation by some of our members that planning board, planning department seems to be reducing the emphasis on impact taxes to finance development. So when people ask about the infrastructure with this increased density in the neighborhoods, how is it going to be financed if impact taxes are being reduced pretty much across the board in every part of the county?
Well, so there have been a number of changes recently. The school impact taxes were just adjusted to be set at 100% of the calculated cost. But it's true that the council ultimately, when it adopted the changes to the impact taxes last fall, it also added a few areas that are now exempt from impact taxes, our opportunity zones, the areas that have been identified for investment and certified by the Department of Treasury as being areas that need investment in the county. And so they are certainly using the impact tax as a tool to be able to direct growth to areas where we want to see it and to incentivize development in certain ways. At the same time, there are other ways that it's been proposed to raise more revenue for infrastructure. So again, on the school side, looking at potentially increasing the recordation tax, where the amount that would increase is a relatively small amount on each sale. But because we have many more home sales on an annual basis than we have new homes, it's spread out over a lot more, and there's an opportunity to raise money there. However, the county council chose not to take action yet on that particular bill for the recordation tax, and they said that they would take it up as part of this current budget cycle. There's been no sign that they're actually doing anything with that yet, so hopefully they will. On the transportation side, there were a few changes that exempted certain areas from impact taxes, but those transportation impact taxes generally stayed pretty set. They're about to update on July 1st that those amounts are going to be released, but the increase is generally across the board on the transportation impact tax is a 3% increase. So, there are, and I would also add on the school side, one of the things we did when we removed the moratorium that we've had for quite a while, the moratorium policy, we replaced that with a set of additional payments, mitigation payments, if you will, that a developer needs to pay if they are building in an area that has overcrowded schools. And the more overcrowded the schools, the more they have to pay. And this is on top of impact taxes. And if they're exempt from impact taxes, with the exception of MPDUs, if they're exempt from impact taxes because they're in an opportunity zone, they're not exempt from these utilization premium payments. So they still need to make these payments if they're building in an area that has overcrowded schools, even if they don't have impact taxes.
Karen Cordry's got a couple of points she'd like to make. Karen?
I do think that this whole point about infrastructure is an enormously important one, that every time we've had these discussions in my community or anywhere else, is people want to know about that. So I just, you're not going to figure it out tonight, but I think it's extraordinarily important that this has to be part of the discussion. The money you're coming from, the schools, the everything else, when you've taken the moratoriums off, it doesn't mean the schools are taken care of. And I think that has to be part of the process of whether or not something approves these things, which is why I think most people are concerned about a by right sort of thing, because that's hard to get into that. I think the other piece is that I wonder whether the county would consider doing some projects along this line on a demonstration basis kind of thing, to see whether these can be done feasibly, economically, whether you can assemble some small parcels and put together some of these projects, because I think people, on the one hand, everybody says, oh, the developers are all going to come, rushing in here to do these projects. And on the other hand, no developer will ever do one of these projects. So I'm not quite sure which it is. It will get too much or not enough, but I think some demonstrations may help the process.
And I wanted to ask a question about that. Assuming the best possible outcome for your planning and what the county council might do, say they fully embrace a missing middle housing. What's the experience across the country to how much transition would take place? Will we see, Lisa, I'm circling back to a comment you made before. Is it going to be negligible over the course of the next 10 years, or do you expect to see a couple hundred units between now and 2030?
Well, I don't know what the future holds, but I can look at the ADU ZTA, which has produced, 40 to 50 a year. It's only been a year since the most recent changes, so we don't really have numbers there. So I don't think we'll see widespread transformation. If that, I'll give one anecdote that kind of speaks to what Karen was talking about is, a lot of people reference a Silver Spring market study that we did on missing middle housing. And we interviewed small developers about their appetite for doing this. But a lot of the large custom home builders in the county didn't even want to talk to us. They said, nope, we're doing a great job. We don't even want to entertain doing another project. So we have a lot of work to do on the zoning, on the policy, and the market side of this to really see any kind of, I think, from my hypothesis, is any kind of decent production.
So lots of my neighbors point to the thousands of potential units that are in the development pipeline in sort of East County, downtown Silver Spring, and ask the question, why isn't there emphasis to develop the development pipeline, and why don't we use vacant commercial space and transform those also into residential units?
I think that's a really important part of this. I think, Alan, you talked a lot earlier about preservation and MPDUs and the low-income housing tax credit being part of this too. And it's also, we need to make sure those units in the pipeline get built. Colleagues of ours recently reduced the White Flint 10-year checkup, and they talked to the developers of why they're not moving. And a lot of it had to do with, the cost of construction. They're zoned for high heights, but the market in Montgomery County is not really there for high rise. They're also waiting for, absorption issues. So there's not, one specific reason why the pipeline isn't moving, but we need to do more studies like that to fully understand, why these units aren't moving. And I think that's a really important part moving forward too. So it's another and part of our housing policy.
And I want to ask a question about the Purple Line route, bus rapid transit route. What's your current thinking about how wide the path is? That's probably not the right planning term to use, where there would be, this missing middle opportunity on either side of Wayne Avenue or in Littonsville. Is it a half mile? Is it a mile? Veers Mill, Colesville. What's your current thinking about that path?
So we're looking at various locational criteria. I don't have an answer for you today, although I think we're trying to figure out is, how do we strike that right balance? I mean, the Purple Line and the BRT aren't here yet, Metro is. So I think there's, some uncertainty there. So I think that's something that we are evaluating from this. If anyone has any feedback on what they think is appropriate, please send it our way. That's something we were absolutely looking at this, that we just don't have an answer for right now.
And then clear up some confusion that I have. My understanding of 2007, the Jawando proposed ZTA would have had this new housing form in the regular setback for an R60 home. So the same width and the same height. And then my understanding was that as you refined your analysis, you thought that keeping it within the regular footprint was not going to work, and you were sort of abandoning the R60 footprint to go higher and wider. Is that a misunderstanding of where you are and where it started?
I think you characterized the Jowando's ETA correctly. And we completed some interviews with small developers who talked about how hard it would be, not impossible, but it would be hard to fit a duplex in its parking and a 2/2 product within the setbacks and height. We certainly do not have a conclusion on if that's the route we're going to go. We know that that's very important to a lot of the neighborhoods that we were talked to, is that, the physical character, the setbacks and the height remain the same. So we're looking at, how do we strike a balance between what we hear to make this product feasible and what we hear from the concerns of the neighborhood.
So I'm going to ask all of our guests, our participants to stay. And there was a final question that I was going to ask, but I just forgot. So does anybody have a final question they want to ask, or I guess from the planning department? Well, seeing none, I want to thank you very much for joining us this evening.
God.
We learned a lot.
There's one. Hey, Alan, Vicky Vergagni wants to ask a question.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Vicky. Go ahead, Vicky.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good, great. So I hear about this missing middle housing, and my concern is the following. Any multifamily dwelling in this county is considered to be a commercial property. It is charged for government services 4 to 7 to 10 times more for building permits and a variety of government services than is a single family home. What exactly is the missing middle going to be considered commercial or residential? When it is, how is it going to be treated? The condos are dying in this county from being overtaxed, and we get absolutely no rebates. We get no fees back. We just pay through the nose and we never get anything back. Is that what they're going to do to the missing middle?
As it would stand now, yes, that is something that we've also heard. We're figuring out what leeway we have in that department. A lot of it is up to the state, so we're trying to figure out is, I guess DC was able to have some movement on that front, so we're trying to talk to them to figure out how we can get some flexibility there. But that is a concern that we've heard a lot.
And I remembered my what I thought was a final question. Lisa, the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned many times the term compatibility. So that's really important for our members, and it seems to be important for you. It seems like if you go wider and bigger, you're going to lose that compatibility with sort of the existing neighborhoods. So we would ask you to keep that uppermost in your mind as you come up with these refined plans. I think people might be able to get their arms around a duplex in their neighborhood. But when you start aggregating property and you start talking about garden apartments and small apartment buildings, they're really out of character with what we considered, compatibility with the neighborhood. So
I think it's just what we're not used to, Alan. Last weekend, I was in St. Louis, and along the street on the highway, you could see a small little sort of duplex, another one, then two or three single family homes, and then another building that maybe had 3 stories, that had looked like apartments or something. Each one, they went along, there were a couple, and then they changed all the way along, but you could tell it had been that way for a long time. They were zoned that way from the beginning, and we're trying to make up after we've had this sprawling thing. So, we have to allow, it's going to change.
Well, my point was that you could see that easily along Georgia Avenue or Connecticut Avenue. It's harder to see along Pliers Mill, for example, in terms of getting in between, the major arterials, and then try to do aggregation property, put a garden apartment where there hasn't been one. So we want to thank you so much for joining us and giving us a foundation so we could have a useful conversation among our members about this. And we will be following the process at the County Council very carefully, as well as making recommendations to you to the extent we can, and participating in your office hours and some of the other outreach that you're doing. I would just mention in conclusion that some of us have been following these issues for a long, long time. We don't remember an in-depth conversation 3 years ago about affordable housing, missing middle housing. 3 years ago. It seems to really sort of pop on the scene for us over the course of the last year and mostly during the time of the pandemic. So some of us have concerns about the speed that these proposals end up by the planning board staff, approved by the planning board, sent to the county council.
Well, and Alan, if I could just say thank you for having us. I think we really appreciate the opportunity to get to hear from the comments that you guys have sent and posted. And if we could get a copy of the chat in some way so that we can make sure that we have all of those comments, because I think there were some probably that we didn't get to, or that we may have addressed partially or however. So it's just helpful for us to be able to see all of that. And then we'll definitely send you a copy of our presentation that you can distribute. And Lisa has posted our email addresses, and I sent the website too. So
thank you guys so much for
thank you.
Us. I think it was really important. So say goodbye and then we will chat.
Great. Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye. So I hope you all thought that was a useful presentation from the planning board staff. And I think we could talk for a half hour about questions and concerns that you have. I'd like to start off by asking Montgomery to talk about his experience on the heat group that they referenced. He and Karen Cordry, Amanda Farber, Liz Brent, some other folks are on this small group, which is a sounding board for the planning board staff. And I know that Carrie's got some strong feelings about that, and I'd hope he'd be able to share them with us now. Carrie, you're there.
Okay, now you asked me to set up a presentation. I wrote some talking points up, and hopefully I can get them through in a few minutes. But here's the deal. The county council and the planning board are trying to create housing for an additional 200,000 people in the next 30 years. They've indicated that they need at least 30,000 from the Council of Government new housing units in the next 10 years. The county council has added an additional 10,000 and makes it 40,000 units that they're expected to build. Unfortunately, I've not been able to get any numbers with respect to how many housing units are in the queue. It was argued that many of the housing units are, large scale apartment buildings, and hasn't been profitable to build them. So they've been in the queue for 10 years and they can't count them in the next 40,000 units. So that's interesting. Also, a lot of, the dynamics are changing. COVID changes a lot of things. Office buildings some office buildings will be converted to housing. That's just a reality. Nobody knows how many housing units that will generate. We don't have a solid basis to know how many of these new missing middle houses we may need. But you can tell along the corridors, it's a significant amount, given the fact that they want them all the way down from Silver Spring to the rural entryway, along Georgia Avenue, Veers Mill Road, Rockville Pike, down Route 29. It's going to be significant. Also, there's an issue with respect to process. As we all know, we've been going through a year of misery because of the pandemic. It's limited the public's ability and knowledge to actually participate in government policy activities like the general plan. It had very little process, and it didn't have an opening, a big announcement like we did with the refinement of the wedges and quarters, I believe, in 1989. In fact, it was pretty much held exclusively to, small group meetings between Khalid and certain members of the staff and certain members of the public who who are outspoken. I was one. They contacted me. We had lunch. It was interesting to talk about it. But the zoning text amendments that we are now discussing is very concerning to me. First of all, it's a pandemic. Second of all, these ETAs, both of them, were submitted prior of the planning boards even voting on the general plan. No less, they just moved it over to the county council for further consideration. So the public has not even had the opportunity to object or offer input with respect to this Thrive Montgomery planning. Yet it's clear that they have a preconceived outcome because they've submitted these ZTAs, and asked the staff to review them. Interesting. I have to say this, the heat committee, I have noticed that members on the heat committee are the same members that spoke during the presentation that Hans Reimer gave to the Sierra Club last year. Same exact members, the same members that discuss the ideas with the chairman of the planning board and members of the county council on a social media website called YIMBY MoCo on a regular basis. This is deeply troubling. Here we have an ongoing process where the public hasn't had an opportunity, yet advocates and advocacy groups are on a regular discussion with our elected and appointed officials, and I should say staff on the social media networks. I'm not going to say anything. I'll leave that to y'all to decide whether, that's appropriate or whether it's just concerning that staff, elected officials, and appointed officials would speak to an advocacy groups, many of whom benefit economically as a result of this ongoing zoning text amendment. Could be, you got to think about the public interest. I'll leave that up to you. The group, the actual heat member group, there's 14 members, 3 of whom are not county residents. Several, 7 to, I think, 7, 8, 9 are realtors, developers, architects. You've got the Smart Growth Coalition, which is a lobbyist for land use policy decisions in Montgomery County. Where is the citizenry? Where are the residents of the county in this overarching discussion of the biggest and most imposing land use decision that this county is going to see in the next 40 years? You got to ask yourself. I do. I'm trying to be as reasonable as possible in these hearings, but you know what? I'm not blind, and I can't just turn a blind eye. I'm bringing it up to your attention. You guys can do what you wish. So far, and what I believe has been planned on such an overarching topic, the heat groups are going to have only 3 meetings with the group and 3 meetings with the public.
Terry, can you sum up in 2 minutes?
No, I can't, but I can try. The way I see it, there are potential violations of the constitutionality and protected property rights of property owners in Euclidean zones. I think that needs to be looked into. The next heat meeting will be the topics will be, how do you implement this? How do we do it? Is it going to be floating zones? Is it going to be form zoning? Are we going to try to do it by right in a Euclidean zone? How do you do it? I don't even think the staff knows. I think they're still, shaking it out with their lawyers to try to figure it out. Then that brings us to why the public is so important. Now, this is where Alan, I thought, was interested the other day. The theme of this, from a civic perspective, should be unintended consequences. Now, the reality here is we've seen history in Ellicott City, overdevelopment, which has created a massive flooding situation, 100-year floods every 2 years. We've seen here in Montgomery County, overdevelopment in the 1950s led Montgomery County to build the largest 75-acre surface retention pond because of flooding, massive flooding. That retention pond is today known as Lake Needwood. Part of the potential consequences is that because of the nitrogen and all of the lawn fertilizers and different things that flow to it, because of the overdevelopment, the pond is toxic to animals, toxic to the fish. There are signs all over the property that you shouldn't eat or whatever. You know, you shouldn't eat the fish. You shouldn't allow your animals to play in the water.
Gary,
Now,
I need you to.
You know, Alan, you gave them an hour and a half or an hour.
Now we've got Karen. Karen needs to make her remarks.
All right. Well, anyways,
people.
Essentially, there are numerous unintended consequences with respect to public infrastructure, public services, etc. There's just so much that needs to be considered. I don't believe the process is in the public interest as it is ongoing. That's the shortened version of what's going on.
I hear you, Eric. Here.
And I've asked Carrie to put his talking points, share them with us, because what I'd like to, the deliverable I'd like from this, I think we should have a Civic Federation resolution on housing policy, drawing on the experiences and concerns that our members have. Karen, you had some comments you wanted to make.
Few things, nowhere near thing. I'm not any of those things about a developer or anything else like that. And I think probably my claim to fame is that my community beat off the Costco gas station. So I think that gives us stuff. And we are certainly ground zero for, you know, where this may apply, since almost my entire community is probably close to a mile from the metro station. I am still very much up in the air about this. I think there's a lot to be said for some of these proposals. I think there's a great deal of concerns, and I expressed a few of them. I think the next meeting we have with this heat group, which I was put on perhaps because I said we needed a task force when I spoke at the Jawando meeting hearing, you know, I think it's talking about some of the kinds of things, like, are there ways you can put the kind of controls on this that we would like to see? I think there's some real concerns with having this as a by right process, but there's also problems with having the whole elaborate optional method that nobody would do it. I mean, I think it's equally possible that this could go way too many of these or do nothing at all. I mean, I think it's kind of equally balanced as to whether or not you get anything out of this or you get much more than you want. And I think the kind of discussions we're going to have will look at that. I think one of my proposals, you know, one of my thoughts to the group may be that your position to the county should, at the end of June, should be, this is a nice start. Let's do a pilot project in one community or something like that. I think there is a real concern with rushing this forward too fast, but I think it's also something that I think can be looked at. So I'm not nearly as down on this whole process as Carrie is, but I think there are some very strong concerns that we need to look at. I don't know that we're in any position yet to put any kind of resolution out on this yet, but anyway.
Alan Myers, you've got a question or want to make a comment?
I think there are two separate issues here, and one that I think the group really needs to decide. Carrie mentioned the legalities, and I think that needs to be investigated. Whatever they decide to do is based on the method they're doing it. And I think we need to actually address the legalities separate from the proposals and separate the two out. The other is, one of the things you just mentioned, that a mile from Metro, I've ran a little radius chart on Maplewood where I am, and 2/3 of the neighborhood is if you do it as the crow flies, is a mile from the medical center metro stop. But if people actually have to walk there because you can't walk like the crow flies, it's actually further. And so saying that people are going to walk because they live within a mile of Metro, it actually drops off greatly after 3/4 of miles where people go to public transportation. And Metro is not the panacea that everybody makes it out to be. So 2 points. One is, whatever the county decides to do, we can argue about the things they come up with, but I think we need to look at the legalities of what they're doing and how they're going about it separately and take a position, or form a legal group to deal with it and raise money to fight it.
Who else has got a question about this general topic and who can inform a possible resolution that we would bring to the body in May? Carrie, you must have something to say about them. Carrie, I'd like to say one more thing. Please, Carrie, go ahead.
Okay. One important factor that we need to consider is this whole premise for this new zoning type. First of all, in my article, I explained there are numerous forms of zoning that could accommodate much of what they're doing. It's just going to take time through master plans and through overlay floating zones. But one thing that we need to discuss is that Reimer, when he initially started this, said that there are two engines that are driving this. One is exclusionary zoning, and the other is affordability. Now, we've learned that these units are going to be on an average of 700,000. And again, back to the unintended consequences, we know that national publications have indicated that construction material has gone up over 55% just this year. We've seen a rising competitive market in the real estate industry. And given the fact that you're going to have competition between the property owners or developers and developer speculators and first and second time property owners, the cost of the initial housing is going to be high. So we're not talking affordable housing. And anyone who suggests that this is, they're out of their mind. They admitted so much in the last heat meeting that this isn't about affordability. This is about attainability. They need to provide housing for 200,000. And that's what they're going to do. The second, with respect to exclusionary zoning, think about this, if you wouldn't mind. If you're creating a runaway market by allowing government to interfere with the real estate market, driving up the price of housing, making it more competitive, and for first, second, and third time home buyers competing with these developers and purchasing these units for $700,000 for a townhouse, aren't we then creating the same exclusionary situation that we're trying to solve? Aren't we making it more difficult for first-time home buyers, for people of African descent, African Americans, minorities? As far as I'm concerned, if you want to create affordable housing, that's fine. But if you interject the government into the market, I think you can have unintended consequences that you're not going to be able to control. And the first thing it's going to affect the young people that live in Montgomery County today and want to move into their own home. Forget the idea of a single family home. I don't know that they'll be able to afford it.
Thanks.
There you go. That's
Peggy,
my thoughts.
Peggy Dennis has got a question or a comment. You have to unmute, Peggy.
There
you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Too many places to unmute. Yeah, I'd like to follow up on Alan Meyer's suggestion that the legality of this proposal be looked into. I know Norman Knopf is retired, but David Brown is still in land use practice. And between the two of them, they might be very willing to sit down with 2 or 3 or 4 of you and have a look at this on a pro bono basis. That's all.
Norm is retired. I've been using Dave on another matter. If people want to set up a meeting with Dave via Zoom, I'm sure we can do it. I'm willing to be the focal point for anybody contacting me to set up a meeting with Dave.
I want to thank the people from Woodside and Aspen Hill who have provided articles that we've included in the April newsletter. So I didn't want to forget that. So thank you very much for doing that. We encourage all of our members to submit content for the Civic Fed newsletter. Might as well thank Jackie Boko for the fine job that she does on that every month. Any more questions or comments about this particular issue? that you'd want to share? This is sort of the best opportunity before we try, drafting some sort of statement that reflects our concerns about this project, which is moving very quickly, through the planning board process and through the county council.
Hi, I'm sorry to interrupt. My name is Joan Warren. I'm new to the group. I'm the co-chair of the zoning committee for the Woodside Civic Association. And in addition to the ZTAs that are being proposed, our specific neighborhood is being targeted right now by the planning board. In June 2020, they voted to explore rezoning almost a third of our neighborhood to allow for missing middle housing. This was done without any notification to the community, and really our input has been shockingly limited. And I just want to point this out because we're really fighting this fight. We're a community of 311 houses, 27% of which are already missing middle housing. So, and the market studies that have been done by the planning board, as y'all know, demonstrate this is not getting us to affordability. It's getting to more density. And as far as I can determine, the only people winning out of this are the developers. And I point this out to you because today it's going to be Woodside and tomorrow it's going to be this community and that community and the other. And I think part of the strategy is to pick off neighborhoods one by one. And because we're small, we're vulnerable. And I really encourage us all. The only way we're going to win this is if we're all together. So thank you.
Thank you, Joan. We lots of it.
Alan?
Woodside. Dick, yeah, go ahead.
Alan?
Sure.
I've been keeping quiet. I have a lot of experience in zoning cases. I was the lead on 19 of them over the years, 17 of which ended up going the way that the citizens wanted. But the one thing that we always emphasized is the issue of compatibility. It's being looked at in too narrow a way. In the discussions here, you're looking at the building. Does it appear to fit into the community? But compatibility is a very big legal issue. When you're talking about rezoning, you're really talking about the public health, the comfort, the order, safety, convenience, morals, and general welfare of a community. And I'm reading from a decision from in the law book, okay, in 2008. That's the way we won most of the time. We won on, you can look at it as adequate public facilities, but you got clean air. When you start to pack all these people together, you change all kinds, all kinds of relationships. And if they start to break into communities and into the established zoning without proving that they meet all of the standards that there are under zoning, we have an illegal process taking place. Because we're not executing on what were claimed as the objectives. And there's nothing, and it's taking us astray. What's really revealing, and it's what Carrie has mentioned, there's other purposes here. We're not solving the affordable housing issue.
So thanks, Dick, for those comments. Yeah, I think the planning board staff, nobody's talking about affordable housing anymore. They're talking about attainable housing. It's a very different thing. That's why we're.
But it's the kind of thing where you have people that go around the United States talking about how to break the zoning limitations on development. It's not. What they want to do is give it away and let us rip.
Well, we're going to.
At any rate, I'll shut up.
Thank you, Dick. Jerry Garson.
Yeah, they keep saying, well, we need to have 30,000 more housing units between now, within the next 8 years. This is almost saying we need to build the widen the Beltway. We need to widen 270 so we can accommodate all these additional people and cars. Because basically mass transit, the way I know it from the past, WMATA is still down 85% of their ridership. It doesn't look like anyone's going to want to go back to riding the subway in the future. They keep talking about, well, this is near the subway. I don't think they've understood how much infrastructure we need. And if anything, I think we should alert the people who want to build a P3 about what their ideas are. If they're correct in this, we definitely need the P3 as much as possible. Otherwise, we'll just die in traffic.
Thank you, Jerry. Any more comments about the issue before us?
I'd like to chime in for a minute. My name is Elizabeth Joyce. I'm in East Silver Spring. It's important to realize that even the planning staff itself, in their January report on missing middle, said that those ZTAs would not accomplish the goals, would not achieve attainable housing levels in terms of pricing, or would produce the number of units that they seem to be aiming for. So they seem to be putting the cart before the horse. Let's pass this and then let's make it happen. And there's also no discussion about where the jobs are going to be, how the jobs and housing correlate. And these need to be part of the Thrive Montgomery. And the county executive has complained that they are not. And this is a matter of great concern. And they are trying to push both the Thrive Montgomery, which is a 30-year plan for heaven's sakes, and these ZTAs through very quickly. And that is a very serious matter of concern. Also, doing it by ZTAs, they circumvent the master planning process and all the infrastructure requirements that go with it. So people have within very reasonable space to say, wait a minute, what about the runoff? What about the schools? What about the public safety? What about the roads? These all are not going to be part of the plan because they deliberately set it up so it won't. So it certainly looks as if, despite the nice rational conversation we're having, that something might be rotten in Denmark. So if you come up with a resolution, it might be, what's the rush? Let's look at this. Maybe, as Ms. Cordray says, have a pilot project, maybe Forest Glen or something. Start with that and look at what happened there, because there are already problems with what they did up there. So people are just starting to wake up to the magnitude of this, and really it needs to be done in a much more deliberate, measured, and legal way, or else we'll end up with, by right, developers can do what they want with these neighborhoods, and we won't have anything to say about it. So they're not balancing the interests of current and future residents.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I made notes, and those were all good points. One last question or comment, because I'd like to move forward with the rest of our program since it's 9:30. Well, seeing none, so thank you all. We're going to try to draft a resolution that sort of captures our thoughts. I would just mention, Elizabeth, that we have indicated to the planning board and the county council several times that we were concerned about the pace that this was going forward. And I think a lot of us share that concern about the ZTAs before the general plan and taking this outside the master plan process. So we are doing that. So thank you, everybody, on this issue. So what I wanted to do now is wanted to draw your attention to a resolution that we drafted that recognizes Jamie Raskin and the impeachment managers for the fine job they did during the second impeachment trial. That resolution is printed on page 18 and 19 of the Federation News. Has everybody had a chance to look at that? I would entertain a motion not to read the whole thing, and I would just read the resolve clauses if that's okay for you. So I want to move that I just read the resolution resolve clauses for try to get agreement on those. Is there a motion to do that? I think Kate,
Dick
Sure.
Coffinger,
I'm
I
motioning it.
move that
Thank
we
you.
support the resolution.
I second it.
And so it's been first and second, we support the resolution. Should we read the resolve clauses into the record?
I suggest, Alan, that we leave it to you. You are our president. I'm sure that, a tribute to Jamie Rascal is in good hands with your penmanship. Sorry
Then-
about it.
Then,
Alan, I don't think you need a motion to just read something. So I think you can just read that and then people can decide if they're ready to go forward.
I move we
Yeah.
waive the reading.
that's what I want.
Well, I'm just saying
But
the
isn't
reading
it
of just
written
the,
in the, isn't it in the written, in the
It's written
newsletter?
already. I move we waive the reading.
Is there a second?
Yeah. Second,
It's been,
Dick Coffinger seconds.
it's moved in second that we move the reading of the full resolution, which is on page 18 and 19 of the April newsletters. Any discussion about?
Yeah, I would ask what this has to do with Civic Fed business.
Well, in the resolve clauses, I thank you, Paul, for that comment. We wanted to recognize the hard work that the impeachment managers did. And the language says that we commend with pride the shining example that they have set for the residents of Montgomery County and all Americans who believe in the rule of law, that we cannot take our democracy for granted, and that we will need to work together to make our processes of government more fair, transparent, and accountable. And that seems to be one of the themes, the principal themes of the work of the Civic Fed about transparency and accountability.
But this is a federal issue and not a county issue. It's
So-
Montgomery County Civic Fed.
Jamie Raskin is one of our representatives, and we're sort of proud of the example. So that's the discussion. Let me call the question, and all those in favor of supporting the resolution, please indicate by raising your hand or saying aye.
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 Those opposed,
Aye.
thing?
I'm opposed.
Okay, anybody else? Seeing no other, any abstentions? Well, the ayes have it. Stephen Brown, I guess, are you raising your hand for yes or for abstention or for no?
It was for yes.
Alan?
I just
Thank you
thought
very
it
much.
didn't go down by itself.
Thank you.
Alan,
Yes,
this is Dick Coffinger.
we
By
see.
tradition and historically, there have been no limits on what areas of government we can be involved in. When I was president of the Civic Fed, we got very involved in keeping open uniform services university over on the campus of Walter Reed. We've been involved in things at the federal, state, and county level since we first got started.
Well, thank you, Dick, for that context. So the ayes have it. Thank you very much, everybody, for approving the resolution of the Civic Federation today, the 12th day of April. It's 9:35. Let's just quickly go through the committee reports and see if anybody wants to bring something to the attention of the membership. The first committee would be education. Anybody have any education issues that they want to report? Moving on to the environment. Anybody have any environmental issues? Environmental committee chairs are not with us. Legislation, Peggy, you have anything you want to share? You're still muted, Peggy. There you go.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Yes.
Too complicated. Because we didn't have a process for discussing any of the legislation that we could have, we never came to any agreement as to specific bills to support or oppose. I was able to testify in support of one bill. It involved deer, and that was because the association had taken a view on that issue years ago. So I won't have anything much to report until next time.
Well, today is the end of the legislative session. I'm not sure that it's over right now, but one of the things that we can report is that the General Assembly, I believe, gave $12 million, could have been $20 million to Montgomery County for parks. And part of it is for the Pepco right-of-way trail that Peggy was involved in. So,
hurrah.
so they're going to complete that trail. So thank you so much, Peggy, for your advocacy for that issue. The Parks Department was very happy to get that allocation. Next, I guess land use and planning. Is our land use and planning chair on the call? Then we'll pass over land use. We talked about a lot of that this evening. Public finance, no report. Public safety. I guess most of you know about that embarrassing incident, horrible incident that took place at East Silver Spring Elementary School. And I think the consequences of that are going to sort of work themselves out over the next couple of days and months. And then finally, transportation. Mr. Garson, have anything you want to report on that?
Yeah, I want to remind people that we're going to have a briefing on Zoom on Tuesday, April 20th at 7 p.m. And this will be discussing the P3 on I-270 and I-495 on the Western Spur. And anyone else, all our executive committee members, all our transportation committee members, and all other people in the Civic Fed are invited to the meeting. I think it'll be informative, and we're going to try to spend most of the time on questions from the audience rather than on presentations from the State Highway Administration. We also want to remind people that Montgomery County has continued our favorite method of not charging for ride on buses, because they've realized as soon as DC and WMATA started charging for buses, their ridership dropped drastically. And we've seen a lot of other jurisdictions in this area now talking about free bus service for the area. The rail ridership is still down over 85%, and it doesn't look very hopeful that WMATA will ever get back their heavier ridership. Also, they've completed the thing on 495, making it less more abrasive or less likely to have skids, and we've actually had no major truck accidents since they've put this into place. They're still continuing to build the overpass at Seminary Road and 495, which shows you that normally State Highway cannot even complete a simple project within 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you. I would commend everybody's attention to the April newsletter where we discussed the budget. We have an article that was provided by the County Taxpayers League. And we also talk a little bit about the improving COVID situation in Montgomery County, most notably with the opening of a new vaccination site at Montgomery College in Germantown. So lots of things going on. If there's no other comments from members and guests, Peggy, you have a comment?
It's just a question. Out of curiosity, could we show a raise of hands of those people who have been able to get vaccinated?
Yeah, where is it?
We're doing well.
So most of
all the blank faces there, the faces that aren't there.
yeah, so
Yeah.
most of
So do partial vaccinations count?
that counts.
You're on the right track.
Yeah, I'm not
It's a real
surprised.
sign that we're all old folks.
Right, but they're all old.
I was going to say that's the demographic, and I'm glad that most
That's
of us
it.
have been doing that. So if there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
Seconded.
the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Join us for the May meeting. We're going to sort of continue this housing conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jackie.
Sure.
Alan, can you stay on for a minute?
I'll call you.
Okay. I'll speak to you